This episode will consist of topics around domestic abuse, domestic violence and sexual violence. If you require any support or help, please get in contact with your local domestic abuse, sexual violence organisation. In the UK, you can call the National Domestic Helpline on 0808 2000 247. And if you are listening overseas, please contact your national helpline where support, advice and guidance will be available for you. Hello and welcome to another week and another episode. There is a very real and very frightening significant connection between stalking and domestic violence. Stalking will often co-occur with intimate partner violence and can be an indicator of various forms of violence. Stalking can be a way to exert power and control during and or after the relationship ends. 40% of stalking victims are stalked by a current or former intimate partner, and 57% of those intimate partner stalking victims are stalked actually whilst in the relationship. 74% of those stalked by a former intimate partner will report violence and or coercive control during their relationship. 81% of women stalked by a current or former husband or cohabiting partner were also physically assaulted by that same person. 31% of women stalked by an intimate partner were also sexually assaulted. 41% of victims stalked by a current intimate partner and 35% stalked by a former intimate partner experiences threats of harm, compared to 24% stalked by a non-intimate partner. And the average length of partner stalking is 2.2 years, longer than the average of just over a year for non-intimate partner cases. This week, we're going to be looking at stalking and harassment and what that can look like and what that means and what the indicators are, and most importantly, how you can get help. You've just heard some really frightening statistics in relation to stalking and harassment. In this episode, we're just going to be looking at stalking and harassment as part of that domestic abuse relationship. We're not going to be looking at stranger stalking, and that is a subject within its own right, but it's not something that I'm going to talk about here. What I am going to be talking about is where those relationships that you can experience stalking and harassment, which can be affected by a partner, a spouse, a family member, or an ex-partner or ex-spouse. We are going to be looking at a really heavy subject. Again, all of these episodes tend to be really quite heavy. At the end of this podcast, there will be some helplines and some apps that you can kind of look at and download if you feel that actually that you might need to seek some support. I think, and I'm hoping that today's conversation is really going to help you and help people understand this nuanced topic of stalking harassment, and really importantly, where you can get help. If you feel or you're supporting somebody that is being affected by what they're listening to, there are organisations that can support you within that. I think that I said right at the beginning, the really frightening statistics, but what I didn't say was that 1 in 5 women and 1 in 10 men will experience stalking within their adult life. 40% of those victims of those that are being stalked or harassed end up being killed as a result of their abusive relationship and as a result of that stalking and harassment that they are experiencing. Those are really frightening statistics, and they are very concerning when you look at the amount of people that are affected within those areas. And it's not just the people who have identified it and brought it to the attention of police. We know that stalking, domestic abuse, sexual violence is very much underreported. So there will be a lot of people out in the world that are going about their daily business that don't actually know that the stalking is actually happening to them and think that maybe this is normal, is part of their relationship. And I think it's important that we stress the ways of identifying stalking, how to cope with it and how to handle it, and how and who to go to if it does happen to you or somebody that you are supporting. I have been working within this industry for a long time, and I'm very used to the term stalking. I'm used to the term harassment, and I know what that looks like and what that means. But I would assume that you as listeners may not have that same knowledge. And so what I want to do is just break down what harassment is and what stalking is and what the differences are and what the similarities between them are. So there are similarities between both stalking and harassment, and both are criminal offences. They would come under the Protection from Harassment Act, and there are protection orders and injunctions for both offences, which is really important for you to know. But also, I think it's really important to note that both harassment and stalking are potentially harmful, and both are not wanted by the victim. And I think that's an important part of both offences, that actually those behaviours, that harassing, that stalking, is unwanted by the victim. The victim can often live in fear. The perpetrator who is committing the abuse they're doing that behaviour in order to maintain that power and control. It is a form of abuse. It can be seen as post-separation abuse. It can be part of the abuse cycle within those domestic abusive relationships. So what harassment tends to look like is that those type of actions can cause mental health issues and emotional anguish to the person experiencing. The action can just be annoying and frustrating and a bit of a nuisance, but the behaviour is quite obvious and quite overt. So therefore the behaviour is not being hidden. It's very much there in order for a person to know, and they want you to know that they want to bother you and they want you to feel affected by them bothering you. Whereas when we look at stalking, it's slightly more sinister. It's slightly more covert. It's when somebody is being very sneaky because they're either fixated or obsessed with somebody, particularly if the relationship has ended. And therefore, sometimes the behaviour is often without the other person knowing, which is a concerning factor when you go back to the statistics that I mentioned right at the top of the podcast. It will make people very scared. It will make somebody very anxious, and then they will feel harassed. So therefore, you can see where the overlay comes. Somebody is being stalked, they're going to feel harassed. It's going to have a knock-on effect. So normally what we see is when people are being stalked by somebody they know, that can be really quite confusing, quite frightening. And you've got the physical stalking, but you've also got the cyber stalking. A lot more of what we do as humans is online and it's over the internet. Cyber stalking is just as important to recognise as a form of stalking as that physical stalking, somebody turning up to your house, somebody turning up to your workplace. It may be that somebody is walking behind you or in front of you or using their vehicle to trace you. And certainly that harassment can be over the internet as well. It can be that unwanted communication, and that can come in any types of form, really. That can be over the telephone, phone calls with the silent calls, or it could be the relentless text messaging. It could be over social media where people are being stalked, they're being overly harassed on social media sites, trolling through various posts or setting up fake accounts, that type of stuff. If we're looking particularly at cyber stalking, it could be somebody hacking into your Facebook account or your Twitter, liking all your posts on your Instagram. If you are experiencing that type of behaviour, I would always advise to seek advice, because there may be an overlap where it's going into the criminal sphere and there's actually assistance that can be given to you as a victim by the police. And I think that it's important that when you're in a relationship with somebody, there's a certain amount of trust within that relationship. So you wouldn't have got into the relationship in the first place. And so once at that love bombing stage where a perpetrator is wooing you, so I guess they're getting a lot of information from you. Just like in any normal relationship, you want to know the other person. You want to know the ins and outs of that person, what makes them tick, who they are. But perpetrators are using that stage to get information. And in that stage where we're being love bombed and we're being wooed and we're being swept off our feet, then we're more inclined to give passwords. We're more inclined to give access to social media. Therefore, that action assists a perpetrator, whether we know it or not, in the time of that relationship where it's good or bad or it's ended, access. It gives them access. So we don't often think when a relationship ends that perpetrator is going to use those forms of methods or forms of communication in order to harass. We end a relationship, we think the relationship is going to end, we move on. But in the domestic abuse relationships, we know that that's not the case. Often the leaving the relationship is the most dangerous and it's the most sinister time for somebody. And that very much is what we see with that post-separation harassment stalking going on when the relationship has ended. But often we don't think about changing passwords. We don't often think that the perpetrator has access to our social media, our bank accounts potentially, whatever it may be. And so a perpetrator has a large access to our lives, and we don't want that perpetrator to have that access anymore, which is why the relationship is no longer. Somebody that is using that stalking methods are, continually using that information to abuse. And that's what it is. It is abuse. Stalking harassment is a form of abuse, especially within the domestic abuse sphere. It's that psychological, it's that emotional, it's that threats to kill, it's that threats to harm, whatever that is. It very much is abusive if somebody is harassing and stalking. So I think we take that for granted sometimes, don't we? As humans, we take that for granted. If you're in a relationship with another person who's the love of your life or whatever, even if it's not an abusive relationship, that doesn't give anybody a right to harass you or to stalk you or to follow you or to intimidate you. And that goes the same if that relationship has ended. If you don't want somebody to use social media, threats, harm, whatever it is, infiltrating your friendship groups, turning up to your workplace, whatever it is, then you do not have to accept that behaviour. And that's the whole premise of the Protection from Harassment Act and orders in order to keep somebody safe and protected. I think that people find it very difficult to report or even admit what's happening, but it can be very, very frightening for somebody. They might not recognise that they're being stalked or harassed. I In all of my training that I have ever delivered, I say we have three brains. We have our head brain, that's the brain in our heads. That is the thinking, doing brain. We've got our heart brain, which is, it rules our emotional decisions, our feelings, if you like. And then we've got a third brain that we do not listen to, but it tends to be the most accurate than the other two brains. And that is gut instinct. That is that internal alarm system going ding, 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 ding. Something's off, something's off, something's off. We don't tend to listen to it. And then something will happen, or we come across in a situation, or we're having conversation with somebody, and then our thinking brain will go, I knew it. I knew it. Because it's that gut instinct. So the first thing I'd say is that if something is not feeling right, then it's likely not to be right. If something is feeling off, it's likely not to be okay. So you may think that something's off, but pull it back to the back of your head, the back of your mind. You might dismiss it as a bit of a coincidence. If you're in a relationship, you might not want to think bad of your partner, especially if it's a brand new relationship and you're in that love bombing stage. Your gut instinct is saying something's just not quite right here, but you're so swept up in the feelings, you're so swept up in the emotions, you're so swept up in the behaviour of the perpetrator that you might just put that ding, 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 ding feeling at the back of your mind, going, no, everything's great. Look at the way he's treating me. Look at the way she's treating me. It's like, I'm the princess, I'm the queen, I'm the king, whatever it is that we're kind of saying to ourselves to dismiss that ding, ding, ding sound. And so we don't want to think that actually there's something off in our relationships, especially in those early stages. There's a level of trust, isn't there? We are trusting the person that we're in a relationship with, so therefore we don't want to be thinking bad things about them at all. So if somebody is turning up unexpectedly and you think, how on earth do you know where I am? There's a reason why they know where you are and what you're doing. Could they have access to your social media? Have you got your location settings on when you're posting where you are? If you work for a company and you have a specific daily routine and the perpetrator is turning up all the time, or she's making contact with your company, making false allegations about you, for example, that is a form of harassment and stalking, and depending on the severity of it and the nuances behind that, if they're going through third parties, for example, then that's not innocent. That's not an innocent gesture. Somebody that's sending you flowers or just rocking up, sending you letters or whatever it is. In isolation, that might not mean very much, but if they are sending you flowers, relentless text messages going through your work, for example, then obviously those become not innocent gestures to try and win you back. That is stalking, that is harassment, and it's not okay. And so we have to look at all of the incidents and not just one particular behaviour. So if you've identified a number of different things that are feeling out of sorts, then I think that you need to take that as a sign, really, that there's a course of conduct going on, and that's where you probably might need to start considering to take the behaviour quite seriously. And that could be confided in a friend, work colleague, family member, support system of some description. If you feel in danger, if you feel frightened, if you feel scared, then my advice would be to contact the police straight away. But you need to be making sure that you're giving the overall picture. If you're just saying to the police, oh, I've got some unwanted messages, then the police might not take that seriously. Somebody is saying, oh, I've got a bunch of flowers, but not the whole context of, actually, I've got flowers, he's rocking up to work, he's sending me this, he's sending me that, he's now making allegations against me. If you're not giving that context, then the police are not going to understand or know the risk that's posed to you. So it is really important that if you are talking to the police, that you give a lot of detail about what's going on, and that you're not just over exaggerating, and that you're not just seeing things that are not there necessarily. It could be that you're at work and whilst you're at work, you're getting 100 messages in a short amount of time, and actually your phone is going off, and every time a work colleague is noticing that actually something's not quite right. Those are potential signs as well that somebody may pick up. If you are that person that is seeing your friends getting these relentless messages or phone calls or the tracking, then you need to point it out to the persons on the receiving end. They might not know it's wrong. They might just think that it's a way of the ex trying to get back to them. It could be that they're in the relationship and it's a way of assuring insecurity, let's say. Let me just make it clear. It's very rare that a perpetrator is doing stuff out of insecurity. They're doing it out of power, control, abuse. But those are all signs that are potentially alarming and need to be pointed out and may need to result in further discussions. It is really important to note, though, that anybody can be harassed or stalked. This could be, anybody can be the stalker or harasser. That can be family members, it can be ex-partners, but also the same as the victims. Anyone can be a victim, partner, family member. So it can happen to anyone, and anyone can be a perpetrator of such. But I think when it happens within relationships, it tends to happen after the relationship happens, although there is a level of harassment that is going on during an abusive relationship. And within those relationships, you might have picked up on patterns and behaviour anyway beforehand. So it could be that you're in the relationship and you need to show your partner your phone all the time because they're constantly going on at you, that you're messaging this person, that person, whatever. So there will be some behaviour beforehand. I think that if there's behaviour going on within an abusive relationship, then I think it'd be fair to say that actually that behaviour is going to happen afterwards as well. If you have moved on to another relationship, for example, then it may be that there'll be this cycle of behaviour going on again. They've done it once, they're likely to do it again in order to maintain that power and control. Why do people stalk the person that they are proposing, that they love, for example, or they have affection for them? Why are they causing them fear or harm? Simply because of power and control. I think that it's got a massive amount to do with the control of that perpetrator, and they know very well what they're doing, and it is in order to continue that cycle of harm. There are organisations out there that you can speak to. There are support services. If you don't want to go to the police, obviously the police are the first people that you can help. It's a criminal offence. They can arrest somebody, charge somebody, they can put protective orders in. But if you're not up to go into the police at this stage, then you've got the Susie Lampard Trust, for example, which was set up after Susie's death. She was, if you don't know anything about Susie Lampard, then you can go and do a little bit of research on her, but ultimately she was killed, and the killer was never found, and her body was never found either. Or you've got the Paladin, who are the National Stalking Advocacy Service. So there are services and specialists out there that can help you. And I think it's a big decision for people to phone the police and tell somebody what's happening and start that criminal justice process. I get it, and if you're not at that stage, that's okay. But support services are definitely a very good way for you to access support without involving the police at this stage. If you just want support or you want some advice, then please go to the website. There are apps that you can download, which is the Hollyguard app. And the Hollyguard app is like a personal safety app. And it was something that was set up after, tragically, Holly Gazzard was murdered by an ex-boyfriend after she had endured really extensive harassment. Somebody that is being stalked and harassed, there is a very real scenario that somebody could have their lives ended very early. Alice Ruggles is another one. Very tragic story where Alice was in a relationship. He was very controlling within that relationship. The relationship ended, and he continued to stalk her and harass her. She did access support from the police, but ultimately he went on to kill her. I think it's really important to understand the risks. There is significant risk of loss of life if somebody is being stalked, harassed. There are civil injunctions and protection orders that people can get out, be that a non-molestation order, or you've got the SPOCs, which is the stalking protection orders. I say SPOCs, they're not SPOCs, they're the stalking protection orders, the SPOs, and they can be taken civilly through the police. Don't feel that the police is the only way to get an order in. You can get different orders, but for a specific stalking order, the police can do that on your behalf if you're going through the criminal proceedings. So if you have reported and the police are investigating, then the police can put an SPO in place, and there are different conditions on them to stop people and prevent people from coming near you or your home, or making contact with you, or even contacting you through a third party. So whatever it is that's causing you anguish, then there's a way of trying to prevent that, and that's in law. And then if they breach that injunction or that order, then that can be a criminal offence. So if there are things that are happening to you, there are things that can prevent that behaviour increasing and stopping that behaviour. You can also, if you're not at the stage that you want an order, then I would be advising to journal or keep a diary of what is happening, when it's happening, and how it's happening. So keep a log of what's going on right from the beginning, when you start, whether you think it's significant or not, is then you can look at the pattern, and that pattern, that diary, that journal can be used as evidence, because it will create a picture that can be used in looking to get that injunction or to proceed with criminal investigations. So if you are able to log and put that in, then that gives a much bigger context on what's happening if you need it later on and you decide that you want to report that to the police. So my top tips are: tell somebody that you trust what's going on, be that a friend, family member, colleague, support service. So that's the number one. If you are concerned about somebody, then my second piece of advice is to check out Paladin website, the Susie Lampard Trust website. Look at the Hollyguard app as well, in order to safeguard and to protect and to get more information. My third is to log everything that is going on right from the beginning, regardless if it's significant or not significant, if he's texted you once or he's turned up to work, when, how, times, all of it. Just diarise it and just log it down. You are not going crazy. This is not coincidence. This is not you making up something. This is not you seeing what's not there. This will be patterns of behaviour that's going on, and it will likely escalate the more that you're not engaging in that behaviour. And my advice would always report to the police. However, I appreciate that is not always something that is easily done, and I get that. If you don't want to report to police, then reach out to local support services. So hopefully this will give a little bit of a flavour around some of those behaviours of stalking, harassment, and the reason why we have to take it seriously, that if somebody is in an abusive relationship and they've ended that relationship, why we can't just go, okay, the relationship's ended, meaning that the abuse has ended. No, it probably hasn't ended, and it won't end if that perpetrator is abusive, that especially if you've made that decision to end that relationship, or you've made that decision to report the abuse to the police bravely, there's likely to be loss of the control that perpetrator has, and therefore that stalking harassment is part of that power and control cycle. So there is support, so please do reach out if you need to. If you would like to seek support for stalking and harassment, you can contact the National Stalking Helpline on 0808 8020 300. There is also support available via the Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service, who can be contacted on 0203 866 4107. In addition to these support services, you can download the HollyGuard Personal Safety app. And you've just listened to this week's episode. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation this week. Feel free to like, share, subscribe so you don't miss out. And I'll see you next time.